So, the first question that I have for y'all today is from one of our eighth graders.
Hi, my name is Ben. What is the difference between editing and revision?
Ooh, I mean,
Or is there a difference? I don't know.
I mean, I think it sometimes depends on what stage of the writing process you're at, when it comes to editing versus revising. I feel like revising for me is the very early stages, right? You have the book, maybe it's finished, and you're just polishing it up to make sure it's ready to go before you send it to your friends or your colleagues to give it a second look. Maybe your one character needs a little bit of work. Maybe this chapter needs to be rewritten. That's revising for me because you're making these big changes. Editing tends to be a little more microscopic. That's when you're focusing on maybe the grammar, maybe the sentence structure, things like that. You're getting kind of down to the little bits and pieces. I feel like when you're at that stage, you're at a stage where you can share it with people because you're not revising and making broad changes anymore. You're just zeroing in on the little problems.
yeah, I agree
Okay.
with that completely. That seems to be like what we've done.
Mm. Yeah.
So, what is a revision process typically like? What's the timeline for that? How long does that usually take? My students tend to revise very quickly. They
Mm.
think they're really good at it. So, like, what does that look like for y'all? Y'all are professionals.
I mean, it takes a lot longer than like, I think with revising, it's several times, at least for me, kind of like at what Eric said. Revising is like going in and doing the bigger changes in the beginning, I want to say, like moving things around and all that before you necessarily get into the nitty gritty. Um, so I mean, I think with everything you do that a few times before you're like cool and then go on to like the smaller things.
Oh yeah, and I'll revise forever.
Yeah.
And Lauren knows this weird writing process for me really well because I'll write like a whole book in like a month.
You
I'll
will.
churn out a draft and it'll be really really bad, and then I'll spend months and months and months revising it and fixing it and making it, I don't know, readable to people. So I think it depends on the project. Like some people revision is something really quick because they edit while they write, and other people they write something really terrible and then they spend a lot of time revising it and making it better.
So, what what's easier to write, a short story or a novel?
I think a lot of people think short stories are easier because they're shorter, and that is, I mean, that's an obvious, right?
Right.
Um, and in a way they are, but it's also hard to make a compelling short story that tells like a full story with a full arc in, only several thousand words instead of like, 60, 70, 80, 90,000 words. So I think they each have their difficulties and yeah, I don't know. I find short stories fun and a little easier just because you can kind of let yourself do whatever without the commitment of a giant novel.
Mhm.
Um, but they're still hard.
Oh yeah, I think for me short stories are way harder. They stress me out a bunch. I'm always late when I'm turning one in because there's just you have to say so much and so little, and I don't know how to do that very well.
You
It
do
takes
it great.
it takes a lot to do it though for me. It's why I don't think I'll ever write a picture book. Picture books are what, like 300 words or something, 500 words. I don't know. That's magic to me. I don't know how people do it.
It is hard though with like a short story. You have to make like a whole backstory for a character or characters, make them relatable and likable in only so many pages. Like you
Mhm.
need to fit a history in like a page.
It's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So y'all have both written novels on your own. What was um, the inspiration or the idea for Battle of the Bands and collaborating, working together with others?
Well, so I had the idea to do a book about a battle of bands, told from this perspective of different bands performing. And I realized that wasn't something I wanted to do on my own. So I brought it up to Eric at a book festival at like an ungodly hour at like, I don't know, it was like 4 a.m. or something. We were at the airport on the way home, and he thankfully was like, yes. And I owe like everything to that. Um, so that was kind of like the idea behind it, was just we wanted to have to show one night. So Battle of the Bands is a story about one night, one battle of the band. So all of the short stories within it are connected, and he elaborated the idea from not just the bands performing, but to include the stage managers, the ticket takers, the merch kids, the people in the audience, and all that. So you get kind of like more of a full view, and I think that reaches more of an audience as well, because you can see like not everyone's a rock star, right?
So how many different authors were involved in this?
Oh, it's upside down. There's
Do I count them? Was it
count
15?
and then us. So
14.
there's 16 stories. And so 16 including us. I guess we should include ourselves as writers.
Yes, you should include yourselves for sure. So how hard was it to work with that many different people and personalities and styles? Like how did y'all like blend, like make that seem seamless, I guess?
You know, I feel like the answer to this question is always supposed to be, it was such a challenge to wrestle everybody together. But like the weird reality is that it came together so easily, you know, like we emailed everyone, we said like, hey, you know, this is kind of what we're looking for. You know, we everyone can't write about a rock star. So some of these have to be other people. And everyone came back with their pitches, just like, oh, well, I want to write about the ticket person. Oh, well, I want to write about someone running sound. And when the stories came in, they were all just they all just worked so well. And Lauren does this thing where she creates these monster spreadsheets, and she's like fantastically organized and just kept track of how all the different stories would blend together. Like I feel like we really need to do some kind of presentation at some point that like explains Lauren's process, because the way she kept track of every little character and every little thing made it so easy. Like it was amazing.
Spreadsheets are key. Spreadsheets. But I think a benefit of all of this is, aside from everyone having different ideas, is they were all really amazing. Like every author was phenomenal to work with. Like we were so lucky with 14 incredible authors to work with, who would just like sent us their drafts, and they were gorgeous. And we're like, huh, all right, our job's easy here.
How do other authors take criticism or suggestions?
Really
I
well.
mean, we didn't really, yeah. I mean, I don't think for anything we were like, this was bad. I feel like that would be horrible if we said something like that. But I mean, I think the most suggestions we had were around like, if we wanted to connect things, like, okay, you mentioned a teacher, but so does she. So can I just rename your teacher this so it's the same teacher? Or like, you have a drummer that's unnamed. Can I name it Beckett so it, works in? And they were all fine with that. And then we worked with an amazing editor at Candlewick, and then she would kind of do a lot of the nitty gritty editing, and everyone seemed to take her comments fine too. And she had really wonderful ones. So
So how was the process for this different for you individually as writers, as versus working alone? I mean, do you have a spreadsheet when you're writing a regular novel, Lauren, or is that something that's always part of what's going on?
I don't have a spreadsheet, because the spreadsheet really is like ridiculously detailed. But I have a notebook page, like a digital notebook file, that I just kind of like do the basics for anything that I'm writing. So it'd be like character name, parent's name, or et cetera, or like the band name, band members, just so I can go back to little things. Like if I forget XYZ's name, like it's right there, whatever one of those things is. But I don't know. I think and we mentioned this before, writing a book is a very solo activity, which is, obvious. You're writing a book on your own. And then until you get like people to read it, but still it's very much your thing. So doing an anthology was really awesome, because the entire time Eric and I were talking about this thing, and it wasn't so much like, my baby product, it was ours. And I feel like because it is ours and it's not just like my words, I'm like more of a mama about it. Like everyone should read this. It's the best baby ever. Look at it. Because I want to just spotlight all of the work that the 14 authors did, that Eric did. Like it's really, I think that's what was different about an anthology to me, was like it's fun. Not that writing isn't, but it's fun in a different way.
So I have a seventh grader who really wants to know what advice you would give to aspiring writers.
Ooh, that's a good one. I feel I'm worried I'm going to take what Lauren's answer might be because she's a librarian. But like my answer to that question, whenever people ask, is just to read as much as you can. You know, the one thing that I feel like no writing class can really teach you, you know, is voice, right? And is figuring out what your voice is going to be, and refining what your voice is going to be. And that's the thing that reading will teach you, you know. So if you want to be writing fantasy novels, if you want to write sci-fi or contemporary books, read a ton in those categories. And then also read outside of it, because you'll learn lessons from other genres that will inform your work as well. So yeah, read a whole bunch. It's what's going to get you there.
I love that
I agree.
answer. So do you think your voice in one piece of writing varies, or do you think that you find your voice and you keep it throughout all of your pieces of writing?
I think it depends the author. I think some authors can change voice for projects really well, and it's very like, this YA book is vastly different from this YA book, and the protagonists, though they're both girls, say they are vastly different. And I find that extremely impressive when someone can do that. And I feel like I wouldn't know this personally, but I feel like it would be different if you're going from genre to genre. Like you can change it up a little bit. But I think others tend to, like, I think my characters are all different, but they all have a similar voice, because it's similar to my voice, because I put a lot of myself in all of my characters. So I feel like you could know it's a me book from voice.
Yeah, like I feel like when you read like my YA contemporary books, like you could tell they're by me. Like if you've read one, you can kind of tell the other ones. But like right now, Lauren and I are trying to write a middle grade book together, right?
Ooh.
And the difference between YA voice and middle grade voice is significant, right? Because it's a different audience, you know, it's a different age. You're exploring different themes and different ideas. And that's been really challenging for me. Like it's been really challenging because like I really don't read enough in that category as much as I should. So I'm reading a little bit more, but shifting that voice is challenging. So it's, yeah, there are some people who are really good at it. I'm not sure if I am or not yet, but I'm trying my best.
He's great. It's been fun.
Right. So when you're writing middle grade and you're writing YA, what would you say the biggest difference between those two are? I think I know, but
Well, I think
I
you
want
have
to see
to
what y'all say.
I think you have to keep, I mean, the age in mind. So, I mean, when I'm writing a 17-year-old character, their life experiences and their knowledge is going to be vastly different from a 12-year-old. And granted, like, we've only dabbled with this so far, so I'm not a pro. But there's a lot more there's a lot more I don't want to say maturity, because a 12-year-old is absolutely mature, but there's a different level from a 17-year-old than a 12-year-old. There's a different acting, like you behave differently. And especially like for a girl at 12 is still going through things. So when you hit 17, you're a little different in that area too. So I don't they it's the knowledge set. And I think for me personally, I have to channel and look at like my 12-year-old journals and just be like, I was an innocent little baby and I loved myself at 12. And I have to keep that in mind, that there was still a lot of innocence of me in it at 12, you know.
Yeah. And I think about the character arc a lot too, you know, because when it comes to young adult books, typical YA character arc is, figuring out who you are, figuring out what the world is like, and then figuring out what your place is in that world, right? Because that's what coming of age is. That's what becoming a young adult is, coming into that adulthood stage. And middle grade doesn't always really do that, right? In the like, I work on some middle grade in my agent life, and like those middle grade stories aren't about growing up and moving on from childhood the way a lot of
Right.
YA is, because you're still a child,
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
11 to 12, that's a big difference between turning 17 and 18, when you might go off to college. So yeah, the character arc tends to vary a little bit there, and then some of the problems too. In YA, a lot of the conflict is always like a big mix of like deep internal conflict, and eternal conflict, I guess, if you're reading fantasy novels, and then also external conflict, if you're in some kind of action adventure book. And in middle grade, like, those stakes are still there, but I feel like they're not always as world ending, as they sometimes feel like they can be. But though I guess it depends on the genre, because middle grade fantasy certainly has world ending things going on.
Well, I think of like Brandy Colbert. I read back to back The Voting Booth and then The Only Black Girls in Town.
Mhm.
And they're both like, I adore both of them. And there's a different voice for both of them, between her high school student, trying to vote, and then dealing with everything that a high school student is dealing with, trying to vote as, a Black girl in her community. And then this little young girl just trying to figure out the history of a house, which is super cool, and and find her place in this new community and all of that, and who she is. And I think she kind of, that it's similar to what you're saying, where like the problems are different and your arc is different.
So, what does a typical writing day look like for you? I mean, do you get up in the morning and you get on your computer, or do you pull out a notebook? Do you like to write electronically, or are you like pen and paper? What does that look like for each of you?
That's a fun question. Mine varies a lot. I like, just like Lauren, I also have a day job, so I kind of write when I can fit the time in. I try to set aside Fridays for my days, and I will sit there and I'll write 9 to 5, and that's my writing day. I'm in front of my computer. I have my musicals on or my pop punk on, and that's what gets me through it. But otherwise, it's usually just like sneaking an hour here or an hour there. Because yeah, I'm not full-time writer. I'm not yet.
Okay, so what is your day job?
Oh, I'm a literary agent. So
Okay.
I work in publishing, and I help other writers get their books out in the way that my books are out, I guess. It's a fun job. I get to make other people feel the way I do, which is lovely.
Okay, so if one of my students wants to be a writer, would they just call you up and say, "Hey, Eric, I want to be a writer. Will you be my agent?" Is that how that would work? Or what does that process look like?
Yeah, not totally. So when it comes to writers who are pitching agents, your book has to be finished. It needs to be as polished as you can get it. So share it with your friends, get notes, revise it, get it all polished up, and then you send something called a query email, where you email a literary agent and you explain what your book is, and who you are, and why it's the perfect book for them. And usually you pitch a couple dozen agents before you find the one who's the perfect person for you. But it can take a little while, but you're all young. Be patient. You have time.
Lauren, what did your journey look like when you were looking for an agent? What was the timeline, and how long did it take from like the time you finished your first novel until you were actually published?
So I got my first agent in 2013. I want to say it was 2013.
Mhm.
Yeah, yes. So it's been a while. So I will say I was very lucky in the agent department here. I wrote my first novel as part of National Novel Writing Month, which is every November they challenge you to write a full book in, the 30 days. Which means by the end of it, you have a full, really terrible novel because you wrote it in a month. Zero chance it's good. And mine was horrible. But the bones were there and I was done and I felt like, yay, I could do it. So I spent several months revising it. Like Eric said, you give it to your friends, you have people critique you to figure out like what works and what is doesn't. And once I thought it was ready, I queried agents. And this is where I want to say I was very lucky. It only took me a month to get an agent. Nowadays,
Wow.
nowadays it's a lot longer. So this was again back down in 2013. That said, I got the agent and my first book didn't come out until 2015. So you can see that there was a gap there. It was the book that I wrote for National Novel Writing Month. That was my first book that came out. But I revised it with that agent. She shopped it around. We revised it again. And then HarperCollins bought it, which was great. But it takes a long time to get through the revising, the going to editors and all of that. And then we edited and all that. So there was time. Nowadays, like I said, to get an agent in a month is not as common. I want to say it's there's a lot more authors out there,
Right.
but yeah. So it's a
Fun
fun.
story about Lauren's lovely first book, The Night We Said Yes. I got sent it as an ARC, which is like an advanced reader
Advanced
copy,
copy.
so an early copy of the book. And I read it and I followed her on Twitter and I was like, this is someone I would like to be friends with. We like the same music. I like all of her writing. And I reached out and we became friends. And now here we are working on
Yeah,
books together. So
yeah. That was like 2014 or
yeah.
early 2015. We became friends, and then we met in person like 4 years later.
I love that. So obviously, y'all both like music, and music is important. Do y'all have like certain playlists that you listen to when you're writing? Do you use music for inspiration? How does music come into play, and how does it inform your writing?
Yeah. I sometimes I'll end up putting together like playlists depending on what the book is about. Like my last book, You Can Go Your Own Way, had a lot of like 70s and 80s music references in the book.
The
So I
title.
had on a lot of Fleetwood Mac and like Heart and REO Speedwagon and like a lot of that sort of inspired my writing as I was going. Um, and like my most recent book, I listened to a lot of Broadway musicals while I was writing it. So the music definitely uh, works its way into the writing while you're working on
See,
it.
I can't write and listen to music at the same time. I'll just end up like typing the lyrics and be like, oh, that's good. So I don't use it that way, but I use it when like driving to work or something. If I'm in the middle of drafting something that I want to work on, I'll probably listen to stuff I liked in high school to get me in that like high school mindset. And I find that very fun. But then there'll be little things that um that are I'm listening to now that find their way in, like my third novel is just Broadway references because I was like whatever, and this is what I'm listening to. So
So how much of your high school self do you bring into your writing?
Ooh, a lot.
yeah.
A lot, yeah. Like personality wise and stuff, there's a lot. Um, but I guess like time era stuff, there's not a lot because like I feel like a lot
It'd
of
be
like the
weird.
slang I used back when I was a kid and like the music I listened to isn't quite applicable to what a teenager in 2021 would be reading. But like a fun example, in You Can Go Your Own Way, the main characters, whenever they're having a big feelings moment with one another and they want to talk out something, they give Swedish fish to one another, and you eat the Swedish fish and you talk about those feelings and you get them all out. And that's something my friends and I did as teenagers, as kids, because we we were these very wholesome, wholesome group of friends that told each other we loved each other all the time,
Aw.
and that's what my characters all look like. My friendships are all very rooted in what my friends were like as a kid, and all those people are still my friends now. So they catch that stuff when they read the books.
Yes, and I find that to be the funniest part. Like the first time one of my high school friends read one of my books, she wrote, she was like, "Oh, so you wrote yourself?" I'm like, I mean, that said, like you said, you don't do any of the like I didn't have a cell phone in high school, so obviously I have to update it.
Yeah.
So I think it's a lot of like the emotions and stuff. But at the same time, I make my characters a little more I was a very innocent child, which was great, and I had a wonderful life. So I didn't swear. So when I give my parents my books, I'm like, I swear this wasn't like me. I'm sorry. Words.
Oh my god,
I,
none of my characters drive. That's a thing in
I
all of the books.
know.
'Cause I don't know how to drive. I've never learned how to drive. So none of my characters drive in any of my books.
oh my gosh, I love that. That's great. So, what was the last concert that you went to?
Ooh.
I don't know, honestly. That's bad.
I was just thinking, Battle of the Bands.
Yeah,
Maybe
no,
y'all were like going
I
to lots of concerts to get, fodder for your stories.
yeah, no,
That
Well, there was a
maybe you had
pandemic,
been to a
so
concert.
yeah,
Okay, so
mine was.
go ahead.
I was gonna say mine was right before the pandemic hit. It was like in February 2020 or January 2020.
I know yours.
Motion City Soundtrack played in Philadelphia. The singer of Motion City Soundtrack is in Battle of the Bands. So I texted him. I'm like, hey, you're coming to Philly. Can we just say hi? Like, I'd love to say hi. He's like, oh, I'll give you backstage tickets. I was like, no, I bought tickets. I'm not gonna be that person. But he still gave me backstage passes, and I got to watch Motion City Soundtrack from up on stage. And I kind of don't want to go to another concert ever again because that was just like it was just like the best experience. But yeah, that was like January. Yeah.
All right, so if you could go to a concert that to see somebody that you haven't seen before, who would it be?
Ooh,
Ooh, haven't seen.
man, let's see.
Um, hmm.
Or
I'm thinking of
it
like
could
bands
be a see again.
Yeah,
If
yeah. Probably the Wonder Years for me. They're a band from Philadelphia. They sing like really intense, emotional, like alternative rock emo music that I love, and I listen to them a lot. And they're a Philly band, and I still haven't seen them live yet. So I think that would be the one for me.
all right,
that's
what
awesome.
about you, Lauren?
I don't know. I just read a really great article about Mark Hoppus, which makes me want to go see Blink 182 again. And I hadn't since I was like 19. So I'm like, let's see if I, how great they are. And I'm not 19. I don't know, probably something like that, or like experience a Taylor Swift moment or something.
Ooh,
That would be
yeah. I'd like to see Taylor Swift live. I would love,
Mhm.
yeah.
That would be
Very cool.
pretty fun.
So, what do you think um, the most important characteristic to have as a writer would be? I mean, is it patience because you have to wait so long from start to finish, or like what characteristics do you think make a good writer?
Oh,
Um,
I mean, patience is definitely one of
Patience,
them.
dedication.
Yeah.
You have to be pretty like dedicated and kind of like a go-getter to see it through. As cheesy as that sounds.
I'd say also I would say generosity too is really
Yeah,
important, to me
yeah.
as a writer, and someone that's like a publishing person, because like the industry and figuring out how to write a book and figuring out how to do all this stuff like find agents and navigate publishing can seem so mysterious unless you know somebody or you've met people. Um, so I don't know. It's it's pretty important to me as a writer to give back and be as open as I can to folks who have these kind of questions. And I tend to like writers who I see doing that more. You know, when I see a writer who's like offering up their time and giving back to the community, I'm like, I'm going to go buy your book. I'm going to go learn about who you are. And I think that's important. You know, being a good literary citizen is important to me.
Oh, I love that idea of a
Agree.
good literary citizen.
Yeah.
Love it. All right. What, how do you, or do you think there is such a thing as writer's block? And if there is, how do you overcome that?
There is definitely. I think you can be blocked in many different ways. You can be blocked in the middle of your story that you're writing and just not know how to go forward, or just not wanting to write the scene, et cetera, et cetera. You can be blocked where you just don't feel like writing. You finish something and you just don't know what you want to do next. You don't know how to keep going in writing. So I definitely think there is. And it's funny because whenever I get this question, I always say, like, if I'm working on something and I'm totally blocked and I'm not enjoying it and I just want to give up, but I really don't, I think of the scene that I'm writing that I don't want to write, and then I think of what will happen next that might be more fun, and I just jump forward and leave myself notes like, write this scene here, make it better, and keep going. And I have lots of those notes in a first draft that it's just like, make this discussion better. It's terrible, which gives me the freedom to get to keep going and eventually to finish. And no, I have to go back to those scenes, but like, at least I finished. So then I feel more dedicated to finish at that point. And I always tell people this, and I oftentimes forget to do it myself. So like, I was really blocked for like 2 weeks and was like, I hate everything. I'm like, oh wait, why don't I just like follow my own advice? It's great. So that's, yeah. But I think it's also important to like be okay with that. If you need time to not write, if you need time to like decompress and just like give yourself time to like let go until you're ready to write again, I think that's really important to know and not to feel guilty about not writing
Oh
or
yeah.
meeting a word count a day or something.
And sometimes I think writer's block is also a symptom of something else that's going on, right? Like, has it been a while since you've hung out with your friends? You know,
Yeah, right.
has it been a long time since you just sat down and played a video game and relaxed? Like, I usually find when I'm blocked and I can't write, it's because there's other stuff going on in my life that either I'm not paying enough attention to, and it would make me happy if I did, you know, or I'm focusing way too much on something else that isn't really worth my time. So yeah, refill the well and step away from writing, and you'll get through it.
All right. How would you describe what kind of writer you were in middle school and high school? Did you love to write? I mean, did you always know that you wanted to do something with words, or did that come later?
I journaled a lot and I still have those journals. I don't read all of them because I'm embarrassed to see what I wrote, but I'm sure like at the moment it was like, my heart. But I wrote really bad poetry, like really heart on your sleeve, because I was in middle school, high school, and like the person I liked was what made up 90% of my mind. So I would write about that. And I do look back at that sometimes and it's a little cringy, but it's also like, that's so good. Like, I'm so proud of you, 13-year-old Lauren. Like, you do this.
I definitely did the bad poetry thing too. I had a lot of bad poetry. I'm sure oh God, I hope those crushes don't have them in a shoebox somewhere where they're going to resurface one day because they were bad.
Oh, I never gave mine away. I'm impressed you
Oh
did.
no,
A plus.
I did. There were lots of poems on paper footballs stuffed in
Yes, yes,
lockers.
yes. Mhm. I need to go
And
track those down.
and then I wrote a lot of like fan fiction short stories. I don't know if any of you have watched Bob's Burgers, but like Tina in Bob's Burgers writes friend fiction where she like writes stories about her friends, and I did that a lot, and I would give out stories to my friends, and I also hope those don't exist still. They might.
No, we're going to find them. We're finding them.
All right, I have a sixth grade student who wants to know, how do you come up with the names of your characters?
Ooh,
Hmm.
that's a good question. I
Yeah.
I, I, hmm, I usually name them after important people in my life. Like in Battle of the Bands, Stephen and Ken are named after one of my good friends from college and a guy who I played in a band with when I was in college. And yeah, like let me see. Yeah, they're they're usually named after people that have been in my life. I'm starting to run out of people who I want to name characters after. So now I've been doing a lot of like babynamegenerator.com searches to like come up with names that feel like they end up having meaning after I've like looked up the name and thought about the name. Um, but yeah, people, places. My next book, there's a college that's slyly named after Lauren. So yeah, it's usually
Oh
people
yeah,
in my
there
life.
is. Very excited about that. um, yeah, I have used rejected baby names for my babies. Like we didn't end up naming my daughter Lily, so Lily is in Battle of the Bands.
Oh, okay.
Um, so that comes, or like names that like I liked that just wouldn't end up being a child's name. Or I have two daughters, so boy names I liked that we never used. So I'll do that. And I also just get inspiration from like whatever is around. Like if my kids are watching, this was a bad example, but I was working on something and my daughter was watching Princess and the Frog, and I named my characters Ray and Lewis, and then I realized I just named it after the characters in Princess and the Frog. So I got rid of that. But sometimes there will definitely be a character that's named after a cartoon character because they're on TV a lot.
There's a
All right.
in Battle of the Bands, the like the MC slash teacher who's in charge of everything is named Mr. Bolivar. My best friend since childhood is named Miguel Bolivar. And I made Mr. Bolivar in my short story kind of as like a placeholder. I was like, oh, it's Mr. Bolivar. And I just put it in there. And then we sent that story and shared it with everybody. And then as the stories came in, Mr. Bolivar kept popping up in the different stories, like to the point where he tells a bad joke in one story and that joke finishes in the next story. And I was like, well, Miguel, you're in the book. That's it. He's also a music teacher. So it's very,
Fair.
it's him. He's in the book.
We have a lot of
Nice.
fun with that. I think that Mr. Bolivar was amazing, and it's such a great name for a teacher too. Like we would have been like trying to think of a teacher name like Mr. Smith. No, can't do Smith. Mr. I don't know. So like you came up with, and it was awesome. And I did the same accidentally in my story in Battle of the Bands. I like referenced a kid who used to go to school who did a thing, and I was just like, oh, it's this guy Ben who accident or on purpose lit fireworks on a stage. It was a terrible thing he did, and I named it after my friend Ben who lit fireworks off on a stage. And the plan was to change the name, and I never did as well because we forget. So it came out, and I like I'm still friends with him. So I he lives here in Orlando. I brought him a copy of the book and was like, here's you, and like I signed it to Ben in the fireworks, and I did hearts. Or yeah, he's so proud. He shows everyone.
That's awesome. All right, last question. What was your favorite book in middle or high school?
um, can I name two from both grades? Is that okay?
Sure, of course.
Okay.
I love it.
So in middle school, it was probably the Twinkie Squad by Gordon Corman.
Yes.
Yeah.
He has this character in that book, and then the characters in another book because those are a series of the same kids. It's like My Life as a Trash Bag, maybe is that what it's called? Something like that.
I think so.
Where the kid makes up the country that he's from. Like it's like a running joke throughout the book that he's from like I don't know. I don't remember the name of the country. It's like Petrarca something something. It's some country that doesn't exist. And that was kind of me when I was a kid because I'm adopted. Didn't know where I was from for a very long time. So I would just make up where I was from when people would ask. And I remember reading that book as a kid and being like, "Oh, look, this person's like me," and it meant a lot to me as a kid. And then in high school, it was High Fidelity by Nick Hornby, which like isn't a YA book, but like it was the first time I read a book as like a teenager where like I think of that book as like a giving you permission kind of book, right? Because in that book, there's this guy who is just like wildly sensitive about everything and a total disaster. And like, Rob's not a great character. He learns no lessons, but like, it was like a rare thing for me as like a young man to see like men being sensitive in that way. And it was like a book that was like, you're allowed to do this. You can be like this. And you can also write like this. And I feel like that influenced a lot of my stuff. That's probably why everyone says I love you in my books.
I love High Fidelity. I love High Fidelity. That was another thing we bonded over, is our love of Nick Hornby books. They're so good. So I'm trying to think of middle school, and all I'm coming up with is I read a lot of Christopher Pike. But I really love, I think I read this in 5th grade though, is I really love The Giver by Lois Lowry. Like it was my favorite book forever. So I believe I read in 5th grade, but then continued to really reread it in 6th grade. But in high school, I got really into theater. That was like all 4 years. So my favorite book was a play called Brighton Beach Memoirs, which I reread like 3,000 times. And I would consider it a YA play. It's about a Jewish boy in New York who's, growing up. And I loved it. I was a Jewish girl I just moved from New York to Florida. So I was like, yay, growing up. And I just thought it was just such a fun play that was relatable. And then I saw the movie, and the movie's fantastic. And in the movie, the main character who plays Eugene has like this notebook, because he's a writer in it too, and I wanted to be a writer, so he would write everything in a composition notebook. And it was like a real flimsy composition notebook, and to this day, like decades later, I write all of my brainstorming in composition notebooks, and they have to be flimsy. Like I have to be able to do this with them. So it like ingrained itself in my mind. So I want to say it was definitely Brighton Beach. And then to follow up, I just really loved Neil Simon, and his other one that I loved was Laughter on the 23rd Floor, which was about a group of friends writing comedy, which I didn't know much about comedy, but I knew about a group of friends. And to me in high school, everything was about my group of friends, and I loved them so much. So this was us, I felt, though the characters were nothing like us at all. It was just, I loved stories about friends, and that's kind of why I still write them, and I dedicate my books to my friends in high school.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, y'all, we are out of time. Thank you so much for
Thank you
sharing
for
your
having
time
us.
and talents with the Trinity Prep Author Fest and all of our watchers. And I just appreciate y'all so much. Battle of the Bands.
Our pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for
Thank you
having us.
so much. Y'all are awesome. I appreciate y'all so much.